You're listening to Young PR Pros episode 116, Learning Lessons from Mistakes.
Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Young PR Pros, a podcast for the young and young at heart PR pros looking for tips and advice on how to build and advance their careers. I am Christine Darbell in Ottawa, Canada.
And I'm Julia Kent in Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada.
So doesn't this feel nostalgic? It's been a long time.
It does feel nostalgic.
Yeah.
It's just us.
It's just us. It's been a long time that it's just been the two of us.
Yeah, Ross is in transit and Claire is...
really busy with school and work and wanted to just tap out on this one.
Okay, so this is like Young PR Pros circa what, 2012?
No, it wasn't that long ago. I think we were probably recording together like in early 2014. And then Claire.
Early 2014. Okay.
Oh, wait. Or has it really been that long? Oh, my gosh. Anyway, I can't. I have all my.
The podcast is at least 4 years old.
Oh,
if
yes.
not. I think it's going on
five
this
years.
April.
Yeah, we started in 2011. I actually had to look that up because I was presenting at a seminar for small businesses about the importance of podcasting. So. Yeah.
Amazing.
So before we jump in, I just need to share something because I can't believe this happened to me and I'm sure it would happen to someone else. So I wanted to share this. I actually got caught with an unlicensed image on my blog and I got contacted by a law firm saying that I had to pay, and if I didn't pay then they could theoretically take me to court, and they made it sound really scary, which is probably what they're supposed to do. But I ended up having to fork over $140 for the artist of the picture that I illegally took from them and put on my blog. Now, the sad thing is I didn't do this maliciously. The post was from 2011. We're talking about before I started the podcast. This was in like my first year of just learning how to blog. And it's funny because the image came from a post called PR Word of the Day, which was my first series on blogging. Like that's how I started blogging, as I decided to do this thing called PR Word of the Week. And every week I would search for a random word that I had never heard of before, put in a definition, use it in a sentence. And then, my whole concept behind it was the more words we know and the more the better our vocabulary is in public relations and communications, the nicer and I in my eyes the better your writing is. So, but yeah, this is in 2011. Newbie, clearly I had no idea what I was doing. I probably just Googled something, copied and pasted it, and put it in my blog. 5 years later, I get caught with it and actually have to pay for it. And
That's crazy. So this was recent.
Yeah, this was this week. It happened this week, a couple of days ago.
No.
I actually had to pay. So has that ever happened to you?
It hasn't, but I mean, I feel like, everyone knows you're not supposed to use other people's images on your blog, but I felt like it was one of those things that, no one ever really enforced. So good to know.
Yeah. And I mean, it looked like I had found a cartoon. So it was a drawn cartoon, and that cartoonist was represented, I guess, by this lawyer or this law firm. And they had, I guess, one of their jobs was to scour the internet and see if anyone was using it. So, I mean, I gladly paid it because obviously I was in the wrong and I shouldn't have been stealing an image or an unlicensed image. But the thing is this was like early on in my career when this didn't really occur to me, and I don't think it was as talked about back then because I was, in 2011, like blogs were just starting to become really popular. Blogger relation was starting to become popular, and like bloggers were actually starting to put advertisement on their websites, and that was kind of a little bit of a boom year. And I feel like I was like, well, I guess I should be into this, but I didn't really know all the laws or the rules behind it. Now, clearly there is a line because I actually tried to see if I could get out of it. And one of the lines was like, ignorance of the law is not an excuse to break the law, right? So I still had to pay regardless. But I wanted to share that because you never know. I mean, I'm going to actually go back to all my old posts from 2011 and make sure that, or even just like kind of do a quick look at all the media that I posted. And I know I'm pretty good and lately what I've done, especially for young PR pros, is anytime that we share a graphic or I do a graphic, I actually build it myself with a program called Canva, which kind of puts together some fun free images for you. So I never have to worry about stealing an image or having an unlicensed image or anything like that. But Canva didn't exist in 2011, and I don't think I understood the concept of unlicensed and licensed images in 2011. So anyway, something to keep in mind if you have a blog that's been around for a long time and you started it when you were a naive young student like me, you may want to go back and make sure that you're not actually using any unlicensed image. So anyway, let's jump into today's topic. So today, speaking of mistakes, we're actually going to talk about learning from our mistakes. But there isn't a day that goes by where I don't read an article with an inspirational quote like, "There's no failure, there's only learning," and successful people see failure as a positive experience where they learn from their mistakes. These are all great, and you hear that everywhere you go, and I'm pretty sure we've said it 1,000 times on the podcast. There is no failure, you just learn. But one thing that I find, and I don't see a lot in a lot of these articles, is, but how do you actually learn from your mistakes? Or no, if you make a big mistake that, whatever, gets you fired or gets you yelled at or gets you, I don't know, written up or something like that, those kind of mistakes I don't think you're ever going to make again because they stay ingrained in your mind, or at least you would hope that they stay ingrained in your mind. They're impactful, they stay in your memory. But what about those smaller mistakes or mistakes that you make in a project? You put together a project and you look back at your project and you say, you know what? I should have done it this way, or I wish I would have done it differently. So it's not necessarily life-altering mistakes, but it's mistakes that you made, small mistakes that you can change the next time that you do a project. And I see this as the more often we can do this and the less time we spend looking back and saying, I wish I would have done it that way instead. The less time we say that, the better we are and the more we improve our work and our quality. So today I wanted to share real concrete tips and kind of how-tos, so how to learn from your mistakes so you can improve your work with every project. So when I shared this concept with the group, Julia, you kind of like put up your hand and said, "Ooh, I've got a big mistake I want to share." So how about we start there? Let's share our mistakes.
My big mistake, and this was a lesson that I've learned over several smaller mistakes, but this was the big one that really really hit home. So I was in one of my very first jobs for a public-facing organization that shall remain nameless, and I was responsible for one of their Twitter channels in both English and in French. And at the time, I was only responsible for I believe they're English, and I was going to be taking over the French in a few months when they actually let go of the contractor that was handling the English at that time. Or I can't remember which language, but one of the other language. So I was, doing this in the one language. I was managing their Twitter. I was doing all of the tweets, and it was great. And one day I took to my personal Twitter, which at the time I thought was locked down, that it was private. And I tweeted that I had been behind the tweets for this organization, and soon I would be behind the tweets for the organization in both official languages. And so unfortunately, my Twitter was not set to private at that time. I had lost track from being a student to a professional and vice versa. I had lost track of whether it was private or not. I didn't remember making it public, but I had. And the person that was doing the other Twitter account in the other language saw my tweet and contacted the organization and says, "What is this girl talking about? Am I losing my contract, my social media contract?"
No.
Yeah. So I was absolutely mortified. And at the time, I actually thought this woman knew that she was no longer going to be doing the Twitter for the organization. But it turns out somewhere down the line, someone had told me that she did not, in fact, know, and that it was a secret that they were giving the contract to me. So yeah, terrible, terrible, terrible situation. So essentially, I was the one responsible for telling her she was losing the business inadvertently, and it was just carelessness. I forgot that it was a secret, and I also had no idea that my personal Twitter was public at that time. So that was a tough lesson to learn, because I obviously lost both Twitter contracts pretty much right then and there. And I continued working for the organization, but they took the Twitter part away from me. They had to do that, right? It was a no-brainer.
Oh, yeah.
But I was heartbroken, and I was so hard on myself. And what I learned from that is think before you tweet, for sure, which we've said before. But I think you also, and it sounds like overkill, but every single thing you put in writing, no matter where, whether it's in a text message or an email or a letter or anything that is in writing, it's alive forever, especially with the age of the internet. You have to imagine it as front page of the Globe and Mail. Mm-hmm. And it sounds like overkill to do that for every email or to think of that for every tweet. But when you're a public facing professional, that is how you have to think. And you learn that lesson the hard way, unfortunately, but hopefully some people listening to my story
will never make that mistake.
Well, yeah. And I mean, also, you shouldn't really be going back and forth between having a public and a private Twitter. There should be a purpose to making it private or to making it public. And as a student and a very young professional, for certain opportunities, I would make it public. For certain, if I had a job interview or what have you, and then, for other things, I would want it private again. So I was going back and forth, and I just lost track. So yeah, interesting lesson learned. That's for sure.
So I didn't know you could actually make, and I guess I don't know if this still exists, but I didn't know you could actually make your Twitter private. So I thought it was always public.
Yeah. So you can make it. You can make it so that only your followers can see your tweets.
Oh, okay. So it's kind of like
and
Facebook.
People have to request. Yeah, people have to request to follow you. And I thought for sure that this woman couldn't be following me, and my Twitter was private, so there was no way. You know what I mean? So So it was a complex mistake, but it was a tough one.
So what do you do different today to make sure that you never make that mistake again, or a similar mistake? So like what's changed today?
Well, first of all, I'm always certain what I'm putting on Twitter is definitely public, and anyone could read it, find it. I also am much more aware than I was at that time. I mean, I was very young, very inexperienced. I'm much more aware now of what I put on social media, and I'm especially Twitter, because I use my Twitter as a professional venue, whereas I use my Facebook as a personal a platform. Mm-hmm. So I am extremely careful with what I put on Twitter. And even if by sharing different articles, you have to remember that those are then linked to your name. And if you're sharing something and you support it, or you're sharing something and you don't support it, you need to be clear, because at any given time, someone's going to check up on you and see what's on what you've tweeted recently, right? So it's important. So think before you tweet is a big one, and be aware of privacy settings, be aware of all of that. And yeah.
And I like the fact that whenever you write something in writing, the thing that you said is that picture it as the headline of Globe and Mail. I was reading an article in the New Yorker that was talking about this whole email scandal with Hillary Clinton. Now, I'll preface this that he was a Democrat, so he probably leaned one way, and that's why the way he wrote the story. But he was basically explaining how basically Hillary didn't really, it wasn't that she was purposely trying to hide her emails, and she wasn't purposely deleting emails because she has something to hide. She was claiming that she just really didn't know what she was doing, and she didn't understand the system, and she had 2 different phones because she actually really liked using one phone, but then, I don't know, the government wanted her to use a different phone, so she said, fine, I'll use them both, and then she would kind of go in between the 2, which kind of just confused her, and she was just, apparently she's actually not a very tech-savvy person. But it was funny because one of the quotes from her, which makes me think of what we're talking about, is she was saying that she was reading through an email, and she's like, I don't see why this email should be considered a secret email, and that's why I was using my personal. But then later on, it ended up becoming something that was, private and something that only should be discussed in government. So she should have transferred it over. But she just didn't, she was just unaware of what she was really doing and basically, pleaded ignorance. And that's why it was deleted or put on her personal phone or something like that. So, I mean, just to think twice when you're sending an email or when you're posting anything. I mean, luckily, we don't have to worry about going between private and public email systems or private and public servers. But people who work in government have to actually think about these things whenever they're sending emails. So, always err on the side of caution. If you're talking about an internal project, even though it may not be secret, you may want to treat it as secret because you never know. And then also, likewise with the public. I mean, if you are going to be public with something, make sure that you've read it several times and you're comfortable that this is going to be going out public. And people assume that their emails or their Facebook posts, even like behind privacy walls, right? And they say, I've got, really good privacy settings and only people who follow me can see Facebook and all that kind of stuff. But then sometimes, depending on how many friends you have, if you have like 500 friends, we forget who's following us and we forget who our friends are. And then all of a sudden we write something thinking they can't see this because I've got high privacy settings, when you've forgotten that you actually friended them a long time ago. And I've seen stories of that where, people have been complaining about their jobs and forgot that they actually friended their boss a couple weeks ago, which goes back to one of Julia's rules, never friend coworkers.
Nope.
So, yeah.
And people get offended, but I tell them.
Oh, yeah. No, and I completely agree.
One day you'll understand.
Yes. So let's actually jump into some concrete tips to make improvements to your work and make sure that we don't make the same mistakes twice. So one of the things that I've actually really started to do lately, because I just finished a project, and we talked about it in the last episode. It was the distracted driving game. It was launched this week and really exciting. We already have people playing it, and I already have received notes from people who are already addicted to it, which was the whole point. So I'm really excited and really proud of it. But at the same time, I do look back and I'm like, I wish I would have done that differently. Or maybe I should have presented my idea to that person differently so that, I don't know, maybe there would have been a different outcome. So one of the examples with the game is the way that it's played is kind of on an angle. And originally I never thought it was going to be an issue, but it does come up once in a while where people say, well, why aren't the roads up and down? Wouldn't it be easier if the roads were up and down? It's something so simple, right? But looking back, and I'm like, what? I wish it was like that. I wish I would have made that as a requirement. Now, I want to be, clear that there are some mistakes that we can change, some mistakes that we can't. This mistake is something that, regardless of how I would have presented my idea to the company, whether or not I would have been able to fix this. But I think it's still a kind of a good exercise to go back and look at my project and look at how I presented things to say, could have I done things differently? And would have there been a possibility that a different outcome would have happened instead? So what I've tried to do is actually write notes. And I also am doing it while I'm in the project, while I'm actually working through things. If all of a sudden I'm halfway through something that's causing headaches and there's confusion or we've made a mistake or something like that, I actually go in and I've talked about it on the podcast before. I use Evernote. I go into Evernote and I create a document for that project and I say, I'm really frustrated about this. I wish I would have done things this way. And then when I'm done the project, I look back on it and I say, okay, here's where I could have improved. Here's things that I could have done differently. And then hopefully they stay in my mind. But then the other thing to do is periodically, flip it open and go through it and say, oh yeah, I remember about this. Or every single time I start a project, open up those documents and skim through them and say, okay, what mistake should I not make again? Whether it's maybe I keep writing in all my projects that I'm not communicating things properly. Well, let's make sure that this project, I don't do that. And then you make a clear, conscious decision. I've written it out. I'm going to make sure that I'm very, very clear in the way that I communicate, right? So that's just an example. So one of the things I find is taking notes and throughout your project, whenever you feel like you wish you would have done something differently, jot that down and then try to go back to it at the end of the project.
That's a really good tip. And I don't want to steal your thunder because I have a feeling that this is, something that I think it's something that most organizations, particularly project-based departments, do, is debriefs. I think debrief meetings are amazing. And I think to your point about making notes, documented debrief from the meeting.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So, I worked for a project management firm for 4 years, and for every project, there was a debrief after the project. For every project that we didn't win, there was a debrief. What went wrong? Why didn't we win? So that for the next time we would win. Mm-hmm. And I think that too often, we get so excited to launch something, and then we are so excited to be done with it that we forget to circle back and to say, what were the issues here? What were the lessons learned?
Yeah.
And one of the best ways to learn is, your first year in a job. You make a lot of mistakes. You learn a lot of things, small things for the most part, but you learn them for next time. And if you're not documenting learning them for next time, to your point, making notes and debriefing after, projects or even smaller scale tasks, how could we have better executed this?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think meetings are really important, like formal debrief meetings where that is the intention of the meeting, not throwing a very casual debrief into an already existing meeting.
Yeah, I do like that. It's I just think it's important. One of the things that I find that's important with those debrief meetings is that, especially if you're new to a company, and even if you're not new to a company, kind of sitting around and going around the table and saying, okay, what do people think was a success about this project, and what do people think was a failure? Sometimes it's interesting to see what people actually think is a failure. And some people think that, one aspect of the project is a success to them, and the other person thinks it's a failure because they see it differently. And I think that's just a very good exercise in, even though you think something was a success, maybe someone else saw it as a failure, and then they explain why they see it as a failure or a mistake. And then you're like, oh, okay, well, yeah, that makes sense. So maybe I'll think about doing it differently the next time, right? So sometimes it's the neat things about those post-project meetings or the debrief meetings is being able to kind of hash out those ideas, and it's not just you talking to yourself and making notes is still really important, but then also getting that perspective from everyone else. Like where do we think we went right? Where did we think we went wrong? Because sometimes we differ in views, right? So I do like that. Another thing, and I actually read this in a Life Hacker article years ago. It says, you can only learn from a mistake after you admit you've made it. As soon as you start blaming other people or the universe itself, you distance yourself from any possible lesson. So I think this is varying a little bit on the, inspirational side of things. But I think one of the concrete tips is actually admitting that you made a mistake and taking ownership of a mistake and saying, yes, this was wrong. I shouldn't have done it, or I should have done it differently. So it may not have been a big mistake. Maybe it was just, if we would have done it differently, it would have happened faster, or it would have come in cheaper, or something like that. Mm-hmm. So I think kind of owning up to things that aren't perfect helps you improve your work quality and your work ethic.
Absolutely. Ownership is one of my big things. Some of the best professionals I've worked with are the people that are so quick to say, that was my fault. I'm sorry. It won't happen again. Those are my favorite people. You don't want to be sitting at a table where something's gone wrong and no one's claiming responsibility for it.
Yeah. Yeah. And, our boss, I could still say that because you're on maternity leave. I find that our boss is actually a really good example of that. And also,
totally.
Yeah. And it's important that I know the podcast is for young professionals, but as we've learned, we actually have a lot of young at heart and middle management listeners who listen to our podcast on a regular basis. And I think it's important for those people who've been in their career for a little bit, who are moving into management or into middle management or upper management or wherever they are, to learn that just because you're a boss doesn't necessarily mean that you can all of a sudden stop taking ownership of your mistakes or blaming it on employees or saying, I told them they were supposed to do this. And I think it actually shows great leadership when you actually take ownership of your mistakes and say, okay, I admit it, I made this mistake. And even if it's something like, I do this sometimes when I realize that maybe I didn't actually explain that task to my employee properly. And then I own up that mistake and I say, listen, what you gave me is not what I wanted, but not because it's your fault and not because you made a mistake, but the mistake actually lies with me as the manager. I actually didn't tell you properly what I wanted, or I assumed too many things, or I assumed you knew something. I should have been more clear. And that, I think, is important to grow as both an employee and an employer and a boss, because the more clear you are, the better the boss you can be. And of course, it shows humility, right? I mean, no one wants to work for someone who's always blaming them for their mistakes. So I think it's you're never too young or too old to own up to your mistakes.
Absolutely. And it is an awesome example to set for everybody around you, but in particular, the younger professionals in your office or in your company.
Any other concrete tips you'd like to share?
I mean, I think the big one would just be generally paying attention. I think that if you're paying attention and you're taking things seriously and you're taking things to heart, I think you're also your memory is gonna be your best friend when it comes to lessons learned, right? So, stay focused, pay attention, stay alert, and do your due diligence.
So I guess this would be where Claire would chime in and say, it's time to talk about the lessons we've learned. So I hope I impersonated Claire properly there. So let's start with you, Julia. What did you learn in today's podcast?
What did I learn in today's podcast? I definitely learned that I should go through my old blog posts on my personal blog.
Yes.
And checked and see if there's any stolen images.
So you don't
first
have to pay.
Of all. Yeah, and I really like your note-taking advice. The way I would go about that would be a little different, but it's a good point, even throughout the process of a project, to be doing that. And another reminder to myself, and I remind myself of this on a weekly, daily basis, never put anything in writing that you wouldn't want on the front page of the Globe and Mail. Yeah, if there's something terrible that you have to say about someone, say it, don't write it. That would be a little bit more advice. Good for us to talk about lessons learned, particularly with our audience, because, young PR pros, whether they're young or just young at heart, are learning things all the time. So great topic.
Yeah. I think my lesson learned is kind of going back to the project debrief. It's not something that we do on a regular basis in our office, and maybe it's something I'll think about, trying to kickstart a little bit more often. But that's something I think is important to do. And going back to what I was saying is kind of figuring out where everyone thought we went wrong, and as a team, what could we done better? Is it more communication? And I feel the more you have those talks, because it is important to learn from your own mistakes and to correct those mistakes so that you make your work better. But I think also as a team, you can do that together to make sure that, everyone together is working towards a better project and a better work environment and all that kind of stuff. So the project debrief is something I'm going to maybe try to think about doing more often where we are.
There you go.
Thank you guys so much for listening. We really appreciate the love and support. Please leave us a review on iTunes. It means the world to us. And please definitely check out our blog as well, youngprpros.ca. I'm Ross Simmons. Thank you guys for listening, and we'll catch you next time.